She was a devoted mother, a respected nurse, and the cornerstone of her family. Mekayla Trine Richardson had spent years building a life rooted in love, sacrifice, and stability. But when she discovered her husband's betrayal, an affair, a pregnancy, and a trail of lies, she made a decision that would cost her everything. She filed for divorce. He couldn't handle that. Just days later, as Mekayla pulled into the driveway with their children in the back seat, he was already waiting. In the shadows. With a loaded gun. What drives a man to murder the very woman who once believed in him? How does a life so full of promise end with blood staining the concrete, and two innocent children left to witness the unimaginable? Before we dive into this chilling case, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Mekayla Trine Richardson was the kind of woman people admired from afar. At 32 years old, she was already a nurse practitioner, sharp, ambitious, deeply compassionate. Born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, she came from humble beginnings but carried herself with grace and quiet power. To her patients, she was a lifesaver. To her friends, the dependable one. And to her children, she was the center of their world. Mekayla had always been the type to pour herself into others. She helped raise her younger siblings after her mother's health declined, worked double shifts through nursing school, and still found time to volunteer at the local clinic on weekends. That's the kind of woman she was, always giving, always nurturing. So when she met 41-year-old Kamron Darnell Sorrells, he was charming, funny, a self-made real estate broker who had dreams bigger than the city limits. It was no surprise that she fell hard and fast. They met at a community fundraiser when Mekayla was just 24. Kamron, then 33, was helping run security. He struck up a conversation about her scrubs, made a few jokes, and by the end of the night, they were exchanging numbers. It wasn't long before they became inseparable. He told her she was the kind of woman men prayed for. And maybe she wanted to believe that so badly she didn't notice the subtle red flags. The way he always wanted to know where she was. The quick temper he played off as passion. The quiet, almost invisible erosion of her independence. Still, they built a life together. On paper, it looked perfect. They married a year later, had 2 beautiful children, and settled into a renovated home in Arlington, a 3-bedroom, brick-front dream with a manicured lawn and custom lighting fixtures Mekayla picked out herself. They drove matching Benzes, dressed their kids in designer clothes, and posted their coordinated family outfits every Easter Sunday. Church, brunch, smiling selfies. From the outside, they were Black excellence personified. The couple you scroll past on Instagram and feel just a little jealous of. But behind the filters, things were quietly unraveling. Kamron was possessive. He didn't like when Mekayla wore scrubs that were too tight. He hated when her coworkers texted too late. When she picked up extra shifts without telling him, it became a problem. He controlled the finances, questioned her friendships, and guilt-tripped her into silence. And Mekayla, strong as she was, began to shrink. Bit by bit, she gave in for the sake of peace, for the kids, for the marriage, for the illusion of the life they were supposed to be living. She stopped posting as much, started smiling less. And the vibrant, fearless woman who once dreamed of opening her own wellness clinic began to disappear behind carefully staged family portraits and forced Sunday dinners. No one on the outside could see it. To them, they were goals, a hard-working nurse practitioner and a loyal husband raising 2 happy kids in a beautiful home. But inside those walls, Mekayla was fighting to hold together a life that was slowly falling apart. And the cost of keeping up the illusion was starting to show. She had no idea that the very man she once believed would protect her was already planning how to destroy her. Then came the breaking point. She first noticed the changes around the holidays. The Christmas lights were up, the kids were buzzing about presents, and Mekayla had planned a cozy dinner to bring the family together after her grueling 12-hour shifts. But Kamron didn't show. Said he got stuck helping a friend. No warning. No apology. Just silence, followed by a string of cold, one-word texts that felt like they were written by a stranger. From then on, it was like he disappeared in plain sight. He stopped coming home for dinner. He'd slip into the bathroom to take phone calls and come out with a blank expression, like whatever he'd heard had wiped him clean of emotion. Mekayla would ask him where he'd been, why he was so distant, and every time, he'd roll his eyes, tell her she was being insecure, or worse, too damn emotional. Like her instincts were just another inconvenience. But Mekayla was no fool. She'd spent her entire adult life caring for others, anticipating needs before they were spoken. And now, her own husband, the man she built her life with, was moving like a ghost in their home. So she did what any woman who's been gaslit one too many times would do. She started digging. At first, it was little things. Odd charges on their shared account. Late-night Cash App transfers labeled with emojis. Then came the screenshots. The flirtatious text hidden behind Face ID. The photos, selfies taken in hotels, mirror pics of a young woman in lace lingerie, and finally, a baby bump. The belly was small but unmistakable. The caption read, "Can't wait to meet you, baby Dupree." Her name was Soraya Monet Dupree. Just 24 years old. A hairstylist with a flashy Instagram, long acrylics, and no fear of being seen. She was bold, brash, and clearly had no shame about sleeping with a married man. The pregnancy was no accident. This was a power move, one that Soraya wore like a badge. Mekayla stared at those pictures for hours, heart thudding, hands trembling, her whole world twisting into something unfamiliar and cruel. It wasn't just the affair. It was the betrayal of her sacrifices. All those years she'd worked herself to the bone, held down the house, raised the kids, and fought for a man who clearly never fought for her. When Kamron walked through the door that night, she was ready. She sat him down and showed him everything: the screenshots, the ultrasound, the cash transfers. No yelling, no tears, just facts. Her voice didn't shake once. He didn't deny it, didn't offer a single excuse. He just looked at her, smirked, and said with a hollow laugh, "Now you know. What you gonna do, Mekayla?" And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't a husband caught in a moment of weakness. This was a man who felt entitled to disrespect her and confident that she'd stay anyway. He looked at her like she was trapped, like her silence was already promised. But he was wrong, because something inside Mekayla woke up that night. Something fierce, something final. Mekayla had spent years swallowing her pain, putting her children, her husband, and her household before herself. But after that night, after the smirk, the smug, "What you gonna do?" something inside her snapped back into place. The girl she used to be, the one who had dreams bigger than her zip code and a spine made of steel, stood up. And this time, she didn't back down. She filed for divorce first thing Monday morning. No second guessing. No, maybe we can fix this. Just a clean, hard decision, like ripping off a bandage from a wound that had long since turned septic. She wasn't just leaving Kamron. She was reclaiming her life. And she made sure he knew it. She told him plainly, "I'm done. I'm leaving, and I'm taking the kids with me." But Mekayla didn't stop there. She looked him dead in the eyes and laid it all out. She was going to expose him. The cheating, the lies, the emotional manipulation, the thinly veiled threats. She wasn't going to protect his reputation anymore. Not to his family, not to the church, not to anyone. And for Kamron Darnell Sorrells, 41 years old, twice divorced, used to being in control, that was the ultimate insult. He didn't just see her decision as rejection. He saw it as war. Her courage, her clarity, it didn't make him reflect. It made him unravel. The more Mekayla pulled away, the more he clung to the fantasy that he could still dominate the narrative. That if he couldn't have her love, he'd at least have her fear. Because Kamron didn't know how to let go. Not without burning something down. What no one saw behind the Sunday suits and wide smiles was that Kamron had always been a man ruled by ego and impulse. The kind who used charm like a mask and control like a weapon. And this wasn't the first time a woman tried to leave him. It wasn't even the first time he'd lost control. Mekayla wasn't the first woman to fall in love with him. She wasn't the first to believe in his promises or fall under the spell of his charm. She was his third wife. And if anyone had listened closely to the ghosts trailing behind him, they'd have seen a clear and violent pattern, one that had been repeating for over a decade. His first wife was Bianca Joy Minter, a hairstylist from Oak Cliff. Back then, Kamron was all smiles and ambition. He told Bianca she was his queen, that they'd build an empire together. But behind closed doors, the praise twisted into control. The rules were subtle at first: don't wear that, don't talk to him, come home on time. Until one night, Bianca came home late from a client's house. The appointment had simply run long. That was all. But in Kamron's world, lateness meant betrayal. He snapped. He accused her of cheating, of disrespecting him. And then he dragged her by her hair into their unfinished basement and locked her in. For 3 days, Bianca was trapped down there with no food, no water, and no light. He said it was to humble her. She called it what it was: torture. When he finally let her out, bruised and broken, something inside her clicked. Bianca filed for divorce, packed up everything she had, and vanished from his life without a word. But Kamron didn't learn. He just found someone new. Her name was Estella Vaughn, smart, passionate, and politically outspoken. A grassroots organizer who believed in justice and people power. Estella was everything Kamron wasn't: bold, independent, unwilling to shrink for anyone. And maybe that's what drew him to her. Or maybe that's what made him hate her. Their relationship was like gasoline and fire from the start. Kamron couldn't manipulate her like the others, and it drove him wild. So he resorted to fists, to cheating, to slowly tearing her down until she could barely recognize herself in the mirror. Her parents had begged her not to marry him, said he gave them a bad feeling, said there was something about his eyes that didn't blink right when he smiled. But Estella was in love, or at least she thought she was. So she ignored their warnings. And when her parents kept pressing, Kamron made them pay. One night, while Estella was out of town for a rally, he drove to her parents' house and set it on fire. Flames ripped through the living room and swallowed decades of memories. Miraculously, no one was hurt. But the message was loud and clear. If Kamron couldn't control Estella, he'd destroy everything around her. The next morning, Estella filed for divorce. No hesitation, no looking back. And just like Bianca, she disappeared from his life, leaving behind a trail of scorched earth and unanswered questions. 3 women, 3 stories that never made the news. Because Kamron knew how to play the game. He was clean-cut, well-spoken, involved in church, known around the community. On paper, he looked perfect. But in private, he left women bruised, broken, and terrified to speak. Not until 3 years later when he met Mekayla. Mekayla didn't know all the details. Not then. But she'd seen enough to sense what he was capable of. She just didn't realize how far he'd go once she decided to stop playing by his rules. After Mekayla filed for divorce, that's when things spiraled. Kamron snapped. Friends say he started showing up to Mekayla's job, pacing in the parking lot like a man possessed. He told her if she left him, she'd regret it in a casket. He drained their joint accounts, told their children, Zion and Nyla, that their mom was breaking up the family. Mekayla tried to get a restraining order. The system failed her, said there wasn't enough proof of an immediate threat. So she kept moving. She filed for primary custody, changed the locks, put her name on a wait list for a domestic violence shelter, just in case. On April 2nd, 2024, the sun was just starting to set over Arlington, Texas, casting long shadows across quiet suburban streets. Mekayla Trine Richardson wasn't thinking about danger. She wasn't thinking about death. She was thinking about bath time, bedtime stories, whether her kids had finished their homework, whether they'd want honey or barbecue sauce with their Popeyes. At exactly 6:17 p.m., she pulled into the driveway of her beautifully renovated home with Zion and Nyla giggling in the back seat, still in their gymnastics leotards. The scent of fried chicken filled the car. Mekayla reached down to grab the takeout bags and unbuckle her seatbelt. Routine, simple, motherly. She had no idea that the man she once trusted with her life was hiding in the shadows, nursing a bottle of Hennessy and holding a loaded Glock 19. Kamron had been waiting for hours. Security footage later show him pacing inside the garage, back and forth like a caged animal, eyes wild, shirt soaked in sweat, the weight of the gun familiar in his hand. He wasn't crying. He wasn't remorseful. He was calculating. Focused. Empty. When Mekayla opened the driver's side door, she was met not with a greeting, not with words, not with reason, but with a bullet. He shot her once in the chest. The force sent her stumbling back into the car, her hands clutching at the wound. But he didn't stop. He stepped closer, aimed again, and fired 2 shots directly into her face. Mekayla collapsed to the ground, but still he wasn't done. He fired 5 more bullets into her torso, deliberate, mechanical, like he was erasing her from existence. And when her body stopped moving, when the last breath had barely escaped her lips, Kamron leaned in and fired one final shot. Execution style. Behind the ear. Zion, just 9 years old, screamed from the back seat, frozen in place, eyes locked on the scene no child should ever witness. Nyla, only 6, had already unbuckled her seatbelt. She opened the car door, ran barefoot across the lawn, her tiny legs moving faster than her thoughts could keep up, her hands covered in her mother's blood. Neighbors heard the gunfire and screams. One woman thought it was fireworks. Another peeked through her blinds and immediately called 911, her voice shaking as she described a man shooting a woman in broad daylight. But by the time the first squad car pulled up, it was too late. Kamron didn't flee. He didn't hide. He sat down on the curb like he was waiting for a ride, the Glock still warm in his hand, the Hennessy bottle rolling gently beside him. He lit a Newport cigarette and stared straight ahead, unfazed by the sirens screaming down the street. When officers arrived, weapons drawn, they found him murmuring to himself over and over like a prayer or a curse. She broke the covenant. She broke the covenant. It was the final act of a man who believed he owned her, that her body, her choices, her freedom were his to control. And when he lost that control, he did what he had done before. Only this time, he made sure there were witnesses. Kamron Darnell Sorrells was arrested right there on the curb, still holding the gun that tore his family apart. His hands were steady, his face unmoved. As officers cuffed him, he didn't ask about his children, didn't ask if Mekayla had survived. At the precinct, when detectives sat him down and asked the one question everyone wanted answered, why Kamron didn't flinch. He looked up and said, "She disrespected me, tried to make me look weak. I had to restore balance." Balance. As if murdering the mother of his children in front of them was justice. He was charged that same night with capital murder committed in the presence of minors, 2 counts of child endangerment, and unlawful use of a firearm. There was no mystery, no doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. But even so, the trial would become a national spectacle, a courtroom reckoning for a man who thought he could play God. 6 months later, inside a packed Tarrant County courtroom, Kamron sat in his orange jumpsuit, clean-cut, expressionless, as if he was still clinging to whatever mask he thought would save him. But the prosecution wasted no time peeling it off. They laid out everything: the digital trail of abuse, the threatening text messages, the social media posts full of veiled warnings and scripture twisted into rage. The jury was shown the surveillance footage, frame by frame, of Kamron stepping from the shadows and executing Mekayla without hesitation. They called it premeditated evil. They called him a man who loved the mirror more than he loved his wife. But the moment that broke the room was Zion. Just 9 years old, dressed in a tiny blue suit, legs barely reaching the floor beneath the witness chair. He sat there, voice shaking, eyes wide, and said, "Daddy said Mommy was a traitor. He shot her so she wouldn't leave us. He said she broke the rules." His words stopped time. Even the bailiff had to turn away. The prosecution closed by describing Kamron as a narcissist obsessed with control and image, a man who treated women like possessions and punished them when they tried to walk away. The defense? They didn't have much. They tried to argue that Kamron had suffered a psychotic break, that he was in the throes of extreme emotional distress, that the humiliation of Mekayla filing for divorce triggered temporary insanity. They called it tragic. They begged for mercy. But the jury didn't buy it. Not for 1 second. After only 3 hours of deliberation, they returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom held its breath as Mekayla's mother, Vernshaw Richardson, stood for victim impact statements. She was trembling, clutching a folded letter in her hands. Her voice cracked as she read Zion's words. "I miss Mommy's hugs. I miss her spaghetti. I miss when she read to me. I hope Daddy goes away forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The judge didn't hesitate. Kamron Darnell Sorrells was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No appeals. No second chances. The gavel struck like thunder, and just like that, the man who thought he could play God was silenced by justice. The courtroom was thick with emotion when the verdict came down. Soraya Dupree, now 8 months pregnant with Cameron's child, collapsed in the hallway. She had to be carried out, her sobs echoing through the courthouse. Her future, once tied to a man she trusted, was now forever linked to a murderer. Zion and Nyla now live with their grandmother, Vernshaw Richardson. Therapy twice a week. Nightmares every night. Zion barely speaks. Nyla flinches at loud sounds. The innocence of childhood stolen by the echo of gunfire. In court, a letter from Zion was read aloud. "I miss Mommy's hugs. I miss her spaghetti. I hope Daddy goes away forever." The room broke into sobs. This wasn't just a murder, it was a punishment for leaving. A message to every woman who dares to choose freedom over fear. And it should never have happened. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was AC. He waited, and when Mekayla chose freedom, he decided she didn't deserve to live. Her death wasn't the result of rage, it was punishment. A final act of dominance from a man who saw love as possession. Mekayla's story is a brutal reminder that sometimes the most dangerous place for a woman is in her own home. So we ask you, what could have been done to protect her? How do we hold men like Kamron accountable before it turns deadly? How many more women have to die before we start listening, believing, intervening? If Mekayla's story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue to expose the darkest corners of love, betrayal, and deadly control.